Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight...
Unemployment dropped by 0.8 of a percentage point from 5.3 as in the last quarter of 2021.
Millions of South Africans, particularly young people, continue to face torrid times. Not even the slight drop in unemployment announced earlier today, and as you saw there, is worth celebrating. We speak to government agencies run by young people, for young people, and with young people in search of brighter and hopefully bigger ideas to deal with the problem. And as South Africa and the world commemorate World Anti-Tobacco Day, we take you down memory lane to how the tobacco industry in South Africa didn't stop with giving the country ill health and other things, but also some first-grade criminals, corruption, lawlessness, and a lot of ills. My guest for that discussion will be Johan van Lochenberg, author of the book Tobacco Wars. But first, South Africans' reactions to the fuel price increase coming into effect at midnight. The Watchdog starts now. National Treasury has announced an extension of the temporary reduction in the general fuel levy of R1.50. The withdrawal of the temporary relief would have pushed the already high petrol price to close to R4 per litre to above 25 rands for 95 unleaded petrol. Against this background, the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy has subsequently announced that both grades of petrol will see an increase of between R2.33 and R2.43 per litre. Diesel grows up by between R1.07 and R1.10 per litre. At the same time, illuminating paraffin shoots up by R1.56 per litre, and LPG gas decreases by 51 cents per kilogram.
This continuation of the relief of R1.50 per litre for the first month will take place from 1st of June to the 6th of July 2022. There will then be a downward adjustment to the relief for the second month to 75 cents per litre from the 7th of July to the 2nd of August 2022. The relief will then be withdrawn from the 3rd of August. Treasury says the revenue foregone from the extension of the relief is estimated at R4.5 billion, and that the proposal is expected to have an impact on the fiscal framework, as it will not be fully funded through the sale of strategic oil stocks.
The government was under a lot of pressure to do something to prevent the fuel price from rising by quite as much as it might have done in the absence of extension of the subsidy on the fuel levy of R1.50 per litre. In the event, what it has done is a kind of a compromise that will neither destroy its credibility in terms of fiscal discipline, but at the same time just cushion slightly the negative impact on consumers.
It says the proposed temporary reduction will be accommodated in the current fiscal framework in a manner that is consistent with the fiscal strategy outlined in the budget. The statement says from the 1st of June, the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy will remove the demand-side management levy of 10 cents per litre that has been applied to inland 95 ULP. There is also a proposal that the basic fuel price be decreased by 3 cents per litre in the coming months. Furthermore, government will complete the review of the Regulatory Accounting System, or RAS, to assess the potential to lower the margins of retailers and wholesalers. Diaboseto, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And here's what the South African Petroleum Industry Association had to say for its part.
It's quite a strange one, the relationship between the demand of petrol and the price itself in the case of South Africa, because we don't have options. Like public transport is really not available to everyone here in South Africa. There are those people who have got no choice. They have to use public transport, and it's available no matter how expensive it is. They still need to travel to work. But for most of us where we stay, I mean, we've got no option because we've got no public transport to just to decide that today I'm going to leave my car at home and jump into a public transport system. So overall, if we look for the demand of petroleum products, on a year basis, and we compare to what has been the movement in reaction to the price adjustment, you don't really see the direct relationship between the two. The demand remains pretty much the same over the period of a year.
Which is linked to the lack of choices that South African consumers have, as you've pointed out. Many simply don't have any other choice. Given what's going on, the war raging on, what do you predict in terms of oil prices, in terms of what we can look at in coming months?
We don't make prediction, but based on the numbers that are available in the recent past, you just need to look what is happening. The war in Ukraine is still continuing, and it appears that that will impact heavily on the crude oil availability from Russia. The recent shared numbers shows that there will be a huge decline in terms of crude oil coming out of Russia to other markets outside the EU. And what also is happening is that the Chinese economy is opening up. They have been in a lockdown, and now they are opening up. China is quite a huge, consumer of petroleum products. So all that factors, they are going to affect the demand and supply of petroleum products in the world markets. So if you just look at the fundamentals, you look, what is likely to happen going forward, it is pointing out to higher fuel prices coming into the future.
Don't you like it when they say they can't make predictions, but then go on to give you every little piece of information that suggests, or in fact tells you quite categorically that you need to brace yourselves for the worst. Now, some political parties say it's clear that South Africans are on their own under what they call a non-caring ANC-led government.
The Democratic Alliance joins the millions of South Africans who are outraged at the ANC government's failure to address the massive fuel price hikes. The fuel price impacts every aspect of our economy, from commuter transport to food prices to manufacturing costs, and with rolling blackouts an ever-present reality, even the cost of keeping the lights on. Our DA supporters and activists are out on the streets right now, gathering signatures for a letter to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Energy, calling on them to scrap the general fuel levy, which adds R3.93 per litre.
The EFF has been literally on repeat that the ANC government that is led by the white establishment has absolutely no interest in improving the lives of ordinary South Africans. And ordinary South Africans is African, and they are poor. They have no appreciation for the daily struggle that we face every single day just to survive. They also have no plan to improve the economy so that it can benefit all South Africans. And our economy will remain in this state because the ANC is hell-bent on its neoliberal economic planning.
The fuel price increase and the effect that has on inflation and the interest rate will be detrimental to economic growth and the economy as a whole, and that will decrease government's revenue even further. Secondly, the Freedom Front Plus has been for numerous years suggesting that the Road Accident Fund be abolished and be replaced by legislating mandatory third-party insurance for all motor vehicle owners in South Africa.
The National Freedom Party is calling on all political parties, the private and the business sector, to assist our government in coming up with a lasting solution to this problem. And part of our proposal as the National Freedom Party is that we must assist our government in decreasing the value-added tax. We must also assist our government in making sure that government increases the number of zero-rated products or food in the country. Already, High food prices have caused a massive impact on the lives of ordinary people, especially the poorest of the poor.
Our country is heading for an economic disaster with very serious consequences that can lead to an uprising. Many people will lose their jobs. Unemployment will rise. Farmers will be hit very hard. Food prices will go up. Workers will be hit hard.
Okay, view of political parties there on the petrol price increase. We are going to see which, as you would have heard, the government has tried to mitigate, try to cushion, as it were, some of us, from and even higher prices that we would have seen. But of course, you also have a choice, or a chance rather, to weigh in on these matters. I mean, our sister programs. Morning Live, the agenda, always like to hear from you. So look out for those invites tomorrow morning for you to have your say. Up next, to the other big story of the day. Millions of South Africans, particularly young people, continue to face really bad times. Not even the slight drop in unemployment that was announced earlier today is really worth celebrating. In fact, according to many analysts, nothing at the moment suggests that there is a way to stop the unemployment runaway train. Look forward to that discussion in a moment. Welcome back. Well, according to the latest available statistics announced earlier today, unemployment slightly fell to 34.5% in the first quarter of this year from 35.3% in the final quarter of last year, while total employment is a staggering 7.862 million people. Not really far off from the 7.921 million people in the previous 3 months. And provinces seeing the highest unemployment numbers, about 50%, your Eastern Cape, your Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and KwaZulu-Natal. And as we have been saying, or you would have probably heard throughout the day, South Africa's young people constitute the hardest hit section of our population. Almost 64% of 15 to 24-year-olds are unemployed. Just over 42% of 25 to 34-year-olds are unemployed. And that's the reason many are saying we are sitting in a time bomb in this country, and the sooner we do something about it, the better, and the more we can really make sure that our country is on a sound footing. Well, the Watchdog team then thought, why not bring together government agencies or associated entities run by young people, for young people, and with young people in mind, in search of brighter and bigger ideas. Wasim Karim is the CEO of the National Youth Development Agency, a government-funded institution that says its task is to remove barriers to young people's success. Zengeziwe Msimang is the CEO of Harambe, a young employment accelerator that helps map job and skills opportunities, as well as bring together all government interventions in one place. Ravi Naidu is the CEO of Yes for Youth, a program supported by the presidency and South Africa's corporates, connecting work seekers to work, to learnerships, to learning, and volunteering opportunities. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for your time this evening.
Good evening to you, Boyo.
Evening, Boyo.
I mean, you know, it's kind of a ritual for us in the media. You know, every quarter when we get these numbers out, you know, we look at them, we, you know, lament just how worse the situation is, and one by no means wants to sort of take away from the significance of this day and of his numbers, because they do give us a sense, you know, of the crisis as it is, the state we are in, and hopefully, it's on days like these that we all get moved, to start thinking about what to do with this crisis that can explode, any time. Your first thoughts, Ravi, when you heard about these numbers?
Thanks very much, Vuyo. So my first thought is, well, I was glad to see that, in fact, there was a positive number in terms of jobs. So that's a good thing, that, in fact, we have seen more job creation, because some of the sectors that have been really shut down during COVID are coming back. So there's more sales jobs, jobs in trade, some jobs in manufacturing, and so on. So that's a positive thing. My second thought is, all of this is happening in a context of very, very low growth. And we have seen 1.2% economic growth in this last quarter. So I think what you're seeing is some of the jobs are coming through because of that, because at least we're not negative growth. But, we really need economic growth of at least 4 to 5% just to keep up with the people entering the labor market, and even to make a small dent in the 4.7 million youth, people under 35, who are looking for jobs. So we are seeing some improvement in this number, but we need much more, if we're going to really have an impact on the backlog of jobs, which, as you say, is very huge. And I think it's a very long road ahead for South Africa. And it's not impossible, but we are seeing, I suppose, much too little progress in making the reforms that we need to make to fully deal with unemployment. Because if you're looking at 47.8% of people under the age of 35 being unemployed, you really want to bring that 47.8% down to 5%. That would be sort of internationally a good number. So we are very far from it.
Of course, as you would have seen, everyone was had to say anything around our GDP growth. It's nowhere near, the 4% you're saying is perhaps something we should aim for. And I'm sure, when it's not the first time we're seeing these kinds of numbers. I would imagine you would have looked at some of the work that you, as Harambee, for example, have been doing, and perhaps sort of some of the ideas that could be developed to, add to complement, some of the work that you guys have been doing.
Definitely, Vuyo. And I think what Ravi has said about there's a very long road ahead of us is definitely true. But there's a lot of work that has been happening. And I think what we've been really doing is trying to find innovative ways to solve for youth unemployment. And the challenge is massive. But I think as Harambee, what we realized is that if we're really going to have an impact, we have to do it working with other people. So we've actually been working very closely with YES as well as with NYDA. We've been working with private sector to create the demand that is required to really, really get young people matched with opportunities. So I think without doubt, as much as the road is long, there are silver linings. And I think even those 500,000 nearly jobs that were created from last quarter to this are, yes, a drop in the ocean, but it's definitely a silver lining for us, because what it shows us is that a lot of the work that we have been doing in partnership through the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, working with partners from across the board, has started to bear fruit. We saw last quarter, we had the Department of Basic Education program, where we had 287,000 young people who were employed in the space of 2 weeks. And that was working across the board, again, with NYDA. So there definitely are silver linings as much as the road is long. So I was not over the moon, but I do acknowledge that for the first time since I think 2008, we've actually seen 2 quarters where there's improvement. So yeah, the silver lining is there without a doubt.
Wasim, I mean, how do we move from the silver lining? How do we move from dent to impact? Because I think, as all of you would acknowledge, dents are not going to take us anywhere. We need serious impact now. And where do you think we're going to get that from? Wasim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I was on mute. So to carry on from where the previous speakers left off, I think we can draw a degree of positivity from today's numbers. Right? I don't want to repeat what colleagues have said, but generally, if you look at quarter one gives me shivers down the spine, right? Because quarter one is where a lot of young people are leaving school environment, either with a matric or without a matric in December, and often have nowhere to go in January, right? If they're not going to university or going to college or entering a job. And generally, you expect an uptick in quarter one, or we've seen that for the last number of years. And this year, you see a drop in unemployment, right? We also know that during COVID, Stats SA says we lost about 2 million jobs. Other surveys, National Income's Dynamic Study, says it's not as bad, we lost 1 million. But we're clawing back a lot of the jobs that we lost during COVID. And I think the last important point to say is that I think the statistics are better reflective because Stats SA has gone back to face-to-face surveys, whereas the telephonic numbers were not giving very good response rates, right? So there is a level of positivity that we can draw from the numbers and use that to build for future quarters on what we would like to do, right? To build on Ravi's point is to say, unemployment in South Africa has always been structural in nature, right? If you have load shedding affecting small businesses, if you have the ports and the railways not functioning, those structural issues are going to feed into your ability at the lower levels. There's only so much Harambee, NYD, and Yes can do unless the structural issues are fixed in the economy, right? But that is not to say there isn't work being done in that aspect. Vulindlela has notched up a significant degree of wins in many of the sectors, right? But I think structurally, we also have to reflect that the political economy will allow certain things to be done and allow certain things not to be done, right? And certain things will only be resolved by changes in the political economy. The last thing I want to say is that we've shown an ability across organizations to collaborate and at least, I mean, it's enough to say we need growth and we need structural changes in the economy, but we have shown a capability, as Zengiziwe said, to impact young people at scale, right? So we've shown how public employment, for example, can have a massive impact in taking young people and pathwaying them into opportunities. We've shown how collaborating across a network like a national pathway management network can start to break down some of the barriers that young people face in entering the labor market. And I think what we must expect is that we're never going to wake up in a single quarter and say, you know, we've solved unemployment in South Africa. The road is indeed long, it's incremental, it's marginal, but by building block by block, we can certainly get there and improve circumstances and improve lives for young people.
You know, Ravi, at a personal level, and I'm not arguing with both of you who, are kind of acknowledging the slight, decline in these unemployment numbers, but for me, it's usually it often comes across as though people then sort of find solace in that, and what happens next is that we then take this kind of small, whether it's victory, if there was a deliberateness about it, or these slight improvements, way too seriously and celebrate them, as though they were they are giving us solutions, when in reality, or half the time, we don't seem to even know, how they came about, which is a dangerous position to be in, because we're then going to wait for the next numbers, which may turn out to be worse, which was the case with the previous two quarters. So what I want to say is, let's talk a bit about what you guys at Yes have done or have been doing, for example, that which we can do more of, or where perhaps you then need other people to complement the work that you've done or have been doing.
Sure. I think that's a good question, and obviously so in terms of the Youth Employment Service, and I think when you introduced us, you were saying it's Yes for Youth. It's the Youth Employment Service, but our website is yesforyouth.co.za. So in terms of the Youth Employment Service, we are funded 100% by the private sector, but supported by the public sector and by the government. But we are funded by the private sector. And our focus is, I suppose, we work in an ecosystem with the NYDA and Arambi and the other partners who fall under this Presidential Youth Employment Initiative. And it's very important that all of us work as an ecosystem, and we're working well together, I would say. So our job at the Youth Employment Service is we work with corporates using a specific program whereby when companies work with us, they get certain BE points to acknowledge the fact that they are actually employing youth. So our focus is getting youth into their first private sector jobs. So because we're taking the view that a private sector job is very important because you're learning skills that, within a business context, you're getting that experience which helps you stay in formal employment. You're learning how to run a business, and then later on you'll exit at some of the people go into starting their own small business, which becomes a big business, and so on. So we focus on particular things like more in future-facing sectors. So we do a lot of training and employment of drone pilots, commercial drones. It's very important because if you have drones, drones are needed for in terms of agriculture, they're needed for security, for insurance. There's a lot of use of drones. 3D printing, people in IT, cloud-based things, and a whole, so there's a number of programs we work with the private sector to get young people into jobs. And in terms of the numbers, we're getting about, the last couple of months, 3,000 people a month going into mainly private sector jobs. And that's sort of the range that we'll be able to get, probably more if the economic conditions are more positive, and that's for the private sector. So we would see ourselves as an important supplementary program focused on the private sector and funded entirely by the private sector. But we would, be supportive of programs where tax-funded programs in terms of people going into public employment programs. I think that also has its role. Obviously, the state can put in much more direct subsidy and create those jobs and of various lengths, and that's very useful. And we think also the programs where there is public funding available to help young people into starting their own SMEs, that's also very important. There's a whole range of things. Okay. But we would see ourselves very much as Youth Employment Service focused on working with corporates to get youth into private sector jobs. And then we are limited to companies that work with us can go up 2 levels in their BE score. So let's say companies are level 6 and they've done all the minimum requirements in terms of BE, but they want to go up. They can then come to us and we can certify that they have created all these youth employment jobs, and then they can go up from a level 6 to level 4. What we're finding now, is lots of companies are not just motivated by BE, They actually have, they just want to do the right thing, or they have international investors, so they're not really focused on the South African market. It's still important because it falls under ESG. So ESG stands for environmental, social governance. And obviously youth jobs employment is part of the social. So it's part of the S in the ESG. So we're finding more and more, if, for example, look at the mining industry or companies which are foreign companies, they're very much also focused on ESG.
Okay.
So where we find companies who see that as an important requirement for themselves, then it makes sense to bring them in.
Okay.
Just one impact.
One quick one, Ravi, before I move to Zangezwa for a second. Are these sustainable? In other words, do people stay in these jobs? Is it a question of going in, acquiring the skill, and then you're out of the system again to go find yourself something to do with being able to show that you at least acquired the skill? Or do people stay in these jobs?
Yes, so that's also a very important point. What's the impact of going into this job? So first, what we find is, if we look at our alumni, most of the people who were in a program with us are in a formal job afterwards, most people. In the immediate year when they leave us, about 30 to 40% go into a permanent job. A portion of them go into other learnerships, other training programs. This is after the year. Some of them go and register their own business because now they've got some experience in terms of work and so on. But in a year or so after that, then of those have gone into further training or SMEs. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but they then go into a job. So what we find is within 2 to 3 years after leaving the program, most people are in the job. But I think that's the theory, is that which we're seeing in practice, you can't get a job as a young person because you don't have the experience, but you don't get the experience unless you have a job. Okay. So this program is just meant to jump into that. But what we're finding is, with that private sector experience, either they stay where they were in that company that hired them in the first place, or they go to another company, or they set up their own thing. But again, there is a small group that we find really struggles to find another job.
Okay.
And, that's also, I suppose, a condition of economic growth and all the other things that we need to deal with.
Okay.
But certainly it's a very valuable and impactful program.
Okay.
And it's something we monitor very carefully.
Okay.
Again, I would just say, it depends a lot on the type of opportunities they get. So if people are getting those more future-facing opportunities that I mentioned, then obviously that makes them much more employable.
Okay.
So I think there's a range of things that makes people employable. So we're also looking at how to improve those opportunities and their chances. And that's where we obviously continue looking at how to improve programs, and that's where partnerships and where one learns from doing. But you have to do it. You have to put these programs in place. And then we all look at our programs and say, well, how do we improve the program for phase 2 and phase 3?
Okay.
So now,
what has been your experience? How have you guys approached it, and what have been your particular succses?
In terms of the...
No, Zangezwa, I'm talking to Zangezwa. Sorry. Yeah.
Vuyo, what we found is that what we really need to do, and what I like about the questions that you're asking, is that it's almost like, let's look at solutions. And what Harambee have been doing for the past 11 years is really trying to look at the barriers that young people face and then design solutions around those barriers. So what we know is that you were just talking about the petrol price now. There's a massive cost that young people have just to find a job, right? So you've got young people spending between 1,000, 1,300 Rand a month just looking for work. So you've got the cost of transport, you've got the cost of data. We know that data is extremely expensive in South Africa, and young people have to spend hours online looking for a job. And what are the costs associated with that? And then we have the issue of networks. So you got your job because somebody knows somebody who knows somebody. And I think that that's a real barrier for young people. Like, how do they get line of sight to the opportunities that exist in a free and fair manner? So what we did was really design a solution and start building out a solution that is a system that takes these barriers into account and really tries to level the playing fields for young people. So the system it's called sayouth.mobi, and it's completely zero rated, so young people can spend as much time as they want there. We work closely with YES and private sector companies to make sure that there's job opportunities that are visible to the young people. So they get online and they're able to look for jobs without paying, and really look for the opportunities that are there. And then I think importantly, what we also do is, because it's using technology, and Harambee is really the engine room for this system, then what you have is a situation where young people also don't have to pay for the cost of transport because they're online and they're able to look for those jobs in that manner. So for us, it's really important that every step of the way, we use the research that we've developed over the years and that we've been discovering to find the solutions and look at what the quick wins are, but also the long-term gains that we'd like to make. So I think in our research, we found, for example, the GBS sector right now, as I'm speaking to you, has 66,000 jobs. So how do we then make sure that we're able to work with the private sector to make those jobs visible to young people and get them into those positions? And, Vuyo, I think another really important thing is just to not forget that, yes, employment is critical. And you had been talking about the length that somebody is employed and how sustainable that is. But what's also important is we have an extremely high number of young people that what we call NEET, not in employment, not in education, and not in training. And the system that we've developed is really designed to keep young people engaged, so that if they go through a YES program, for example, and at the end of that program, let's say it's 6 months, we don't want to lose those young people. And, in the beginning of the show, you talked about what happens to those young people. Where do they go? And is that almost like a sitting on a time bomb? And so we are really, really concerned that we make sure that even when young people do not have jobs and are not employed, they're still able to get learning opportunities and improve themselves so that they can begin to pathway themselves into opportunities. So I think it's important that we look at how we keep young people engaged, how we keep them active, and how we keep them within the system. Because once they get out of the system is when we really start looking at what could possibly be real challenges for our country.
Okay, Wasim, your colleagues and partners have spoken about, how you're aligned and some of the things you're doing together and so on. What for you is still missing? And I know we're not going to, we don't have the time to go through many of them, but we still have the whole month of June to dedicate to youth matters. So you will be back here, I'm sure, more than once. Just for you, what for you is missing in the context of today's numbers? What can we speed up? What are the quick wins that we can see if we were to do ABC?
Yeah, you look around the country, right, and you say that there's no shortage of work to be done in South Africa, right? Zengiziwe will tell you about how the 300,000 young people who are working in the public education system doing learner support and teacher support, they're not doing nothing every month. They're really improving the outcomes of the basic education system, right? They're doing real work that supports young people, supports other young people. They take the money they earn and they spend it in local communities. I think there's potential at any given point in time to get that number up of 300,000 to 1 million or 2 million, right? It's going to cost us money. We're going to have to find that money inside the fiscus, but we waste a lot of money on stupid things. And I think we could definitely, like I say, there's no shortage of work to be done. So something that looks like a publicly funded employment guarantee can certainly reach 1 to 2 million young people collaboratively between 3 people sitting here tonight. I can give you that reassurance that it can happen, and then you can really start to pull down that unemployment number, probably under 30%, probably closer to 25%. Yeah? And then you feel like you're really making an impact. So I think certainly collaboration, getting the structural issues right, and massifying impact has the ability for us to improve the prospects of young people in South Africa.
And that's all going to leave this conversation for now. Let me thank all 3 of you for being able to come through and share with South Africans what you have been doing in your respective little corners. We thought we should give this opportunity to those who say they do have some, successes to share. They may not be quite at scale or giving us the answers we need to all our unemployment, particularly youth unemployment problems, but people are beginning to do certain things in their corners. Hopefully we'll bring more and more of such people here on the program and on our other platforms. But to this now, 9-10 years ago, tobacco was a 22 billion rands industry, and that was excluding the illicit part of the industry, which on its own cost, at least according to estimate, the fiscus between 8 and 9 billion rands each year. Now, Johan van Lochrenberg is the author of a riveting tell-all book, Tobacco Wars, published a couple of years ago. It's a riveting account of not only South Africa's often dirty and dangerous tobacco industry, but also an account of how the barons captured our state law enforcement agencies and the like. And I thought on the back of state capture, which we have been busy with, we're still busy looking at the report and what to do with them and so on. Here's an opportunity on World Anti-Tobacco Day to talk about that part, of our history as well, and what it has done to bring our country where it is now, where we are talking about rising unemployment that we seemingly can't do much, if anything, about how we've been robbed of revenue, billions over the years, but also how these people have had their hand in corruption and the like. Johan, thanks very much for your time this evening. I was hoping that we'd have a great deal more time, but I think certain things got the better of me. In your book, you talk about how the big guns, in the industry, captured, or at least tried to capture your SARS, how they tried to capture your NPAs, all because they wanted to hide and, of course, continue with their illicit activities.
Yes, good evening, and to your viewers. In a nutshell, you've said it. I think, what we dealt with was in the years preceding 2014, there was a big project going on at the Revenue Service that focused on the industry as a whole, big guns and small guns and growing guns. And it was a highly contested space and lots of dirty tricks and all sorts of shenanigans. And relationships that perhaps could be considered to be corrupt or problematic in one way or another with law enforcement officials and so forth. And because of those contestations and I think the successes that the Revenue Service began to make within that industry, the heat was on. And, as a consequence, a couple of people commenced attacking the Revenue Service and specific individuals. And that then automatically provided a pretext for everybody and anybody who had a beef with the Revenue Service to jump onto the bandwagon. And out of that came all sorts of consequences. Least of it, that different components who had disputes and disagreements with the Revenue Service, or who wanted to capture the Revenue Service, began to operate in tandem. yeah, the rest is history.
And of course, it's not to say the smaller players were innocent. On the one hand, they were involved in this tug of war where they had to take, the big guns on, but also on them. Themselves, they were involved in a lot of, illicit and corrupt activities.
Yes, I mean, I've always made the point that there are actually no angels in this industry, whether they are the well-known companies, the multinationals, or some of the smaller players within the South African context. They all have their skeletons in the closet, and they all have their, activities to answer to in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And now, what was interesting coming out of the book was just how these people carefully, plotted their activities, everything from how they would hide their money and their activities, but also how they would capture those who were then a threat to their success. And we're talking about all these wrong things that they were doing. Big monies are really involved.
Yes, certainly. If you're on the, on the dark side of the tobacco industry, there's a hell of a lot of money to make. And we were certainly in 2014, in the beginning of that year, in the process of shutting them down. We intended prosecuting many of them and holding them to account in various ways and means, together with some of the other state enforcement agencies. And that was primarily the threat. And I think one of the things, and this is not unique to South Africa, is that the tobacco industry has a very long history of sidling up to politicians, people in government, policymakers, lobby groups, as well as organized crime figures and money launderers. And so you got this almost like a Venn diagram where tobacco is the common denominator and all these different associations. And out of that, you get this melting pot of different influences and different levers that these people can pull if they stand to be under threat of discovery and being held to account. And that's really what happened at the Revenue Service. It was the proverbial perfect storm.
Mm-hmm. And they were not, it isn't just that they were able to capture, or bribe. They were capable of worse things. They would kill, whenever anyone, stood in front of them and what they wanted to achieve or do.
Oh, as I can recall in the early 2000s already, one of the investigators that worked with us on one of the projects was shot and killed in his driveway at home. By way of example, we know of several assassination attempts and so forth. So yeah, certainly. I mean, people plotted to bomb my office, So yeah, no, it's a messy. It's a really messy sector of our economy.
Quick last one, Johan. Do you think we have been able to break the back of the bad guys in this industry, big and small?
I think we're moving off a base where the apartheid regime didn't leave us with a perfect criminal justice system. There were some green shoots in the years post 94. State capture set us back tremendously. It's going to take time, and we must be patient. But there are some encouraging signs if you look at what the Revenue Service has achieved of late. There's been a significant conviction and criminal sentence in one instance. And they're certainly going after the money. I've seen some of the numbers that have been published. So I think they've turned the corner, and I hope they can maintain that impetus and, pick up from where where things were sort of left off.
Okay, and that's why we're going to leave a special thanks to you for your time and insights this evening, Johan van Lochenberg, who's the author of the book Tobacco Wars. With what all our colleagues were busy really talking about health matters, financial matters, tobacco's role in dirtying our environment, not only here in South Africa, but across the world. We thought, well, here in South Africa, we have another dimension to this day, and that was how the tobacco industry here in South Africa really made things not easy for state law enforcement agencies and not easy for our country. In fact, in many ways worse if we look at the role some of these guys played in trying to capture the state and in trying to really make our state law enforcement agencies look bad and ineffective, and we continue to reap the rewards or the fruits of that particular era. But as Johan says, slowly but surely we are getting there, and hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later. That's our show for this evening. To join us again tomorrow night, 8 p.m. sharp. Have a good night.